Well, hello and welcome to this week's video. This week it's the Q&A. I want to say a huge thank you to everybody who asked a question. I got lots of questions. I really genuinely appreciate that. So many, in fact, that I've had to split this Q&A over about 3 videos. But that's all good. I love talking to you guys. I love interacting, so thank you very much. Now, I did say I was going to do a giveaway for everyone who asked a question, and here are the prizes that I've managed to dig out. I've got this, which is a Spyder, can you see that there? A Spyder 5 Express screen calibrator. It's about 99 quid, and I think I've used it once, and it's all in good working order, so that's going to go to someone. And also, I've got this book, which is the FotoVue Photographing London book, which is again hardly used, and that's going to go to someone as well. So stick around for the draw, which will be at the end of the last episode of the Q&A, but for now let's crack on with it. Okay. All right, so I've got my drink. I'm ready to go. This could be a long session. I've got lots of questions, so thank you very much to everyone who submitted a question. I'll try and answer them as fully and concisely as I can. And yeah, let's get started, shall we? So first question is from March Meadow, and they ask, what drone do you use? And they also say, can you also at some point do a vlog on useful drone tips for photographers? Well, I can tell you that the drone that I use is a Mavic Mini. You'll probably notice that in the past, or you may have noticed in the past, that I've been a little bit dismissive of drones. I've had 4 drones. I've taken back 4 drones. I now have no drones, and I'm perfectly happy without them. I've had several. I've always wanted to use drones in my footage, but I've always found them a bit cumbersome. I think I had a Phantom 3, a Mavic Pro, and a DJI Spark. And none of them really worked for me, but this Mavic Mini seems to work really well in terms of video. It's only 1080p. We don't think you can get half of 4K, I think, at 30, but I've been using it at 1080, 60, and it seems to work really well. Now, in terms of photography, drone photography, that's a different matter. I've never really taken an image at all with a drone, but I will do a video, see if I can work something out, see if I can work out how to use it. I do know that the Mavic Mini is only a 12 megapixel camera. I also know that it only produces JPEG images and not RAWs, so it will be a challenge, but yeah, look out for that in the future. I will try and do something along those lines. Neil Thacker says, my question would be, if you could only choose one subject, landscape or wildlife, what would it be and why? Okay, well, I've done this before in Q&As, generally tending to be around street photography, so street or landscape. And it's a tough one because the more I do wildlife, the more I enjoy it, I have to say. I'm definitely, now go out, especially when I'm doing landscape, often go out and think, oh, I wish I'd have brought the big lens with me to take some wildlife shots. And I think the thing initially with wildlife that kind of put me off in the first place is landscape photography vlogs or landscape photography videos are quite easy to make, really, because you know what you're going to get in terms of the landscape. You might not know in terms of the conditions, but in terms of the landscape, it's a very slow, methodical process. Nothing moves, and you can take your time and make the video, and you can film all the B-roll, and you can take the shots, and you can very, carefully and precisely and methodically talk through the images and what you're going to do. Whereas with wildlife photography, it's a lot more off the cuff. So it's like you don't know what you're going to get. You don't know if you're going to get a video out at all. You don't know if you're going to get any wildlife. And when you do, you sometimes don't know what that wildlife's going to be. You don't know exactly where it's going to be. But there's something really, really, really interesting about taking wildlife shots. And there's something really interesting. The more I go out, the more I appreciate how difficult it is, wildlife photography, but also how much fun it is. So right now, I'd still say that if I could only do one subject, it would probably be landscape. But my God, I would miss wildlife if that were the case. Neville Watkins says, what's in your bag, Gary? Thank you, Neville. Obviously, Neville watches the podcast. If you don't watch the podcast, then, well, we're on a break, but we've got loads of second episodes coming out over the summer and before we get back together. But in the podcast, or on the podcast, one of the, I think we had a Photography Room 101 section at some point, and I said I would put what's in my bag videos in it because, what's in my bag? Well, it's obviously going to be a camera and some lenses. It's just that I don't have any videos to show you, any vlogs. I haven't been out taking any pictures recently. So I'm going to do a what's in my bag video. I can only apologise for that. I know that I know that it's probably not what everyone wants to see, but I have had a few people ask me, therefore that's my justification. So, just to let you know, Neville, it's a camera and some lenses and a few other bits. But yeah, thanks for the question. Bill Rankin Photography asks, so I've got a question for the Q&A, more a suggestion really. Have you any plans for a meet-up for a few subscribers and all go to a few locations and get some shots together? Might be good now things are getting back to normal. Well, Bill, I would love to do that. I definitely, several times in the past I've talked about arranging something. Normally, I think often around my street photography, where I was thinking about a meet-up in London or something. But I would love to get together with a few subscribers and have a good chat and take some photos. The problem is for me is that at the moment I'm not, well, as a family we're not out of this pandemic, I think, in the same way that a lot of other people are. So although things appear to be easing, I say that tentatively because we could be heading towards a third wave, who knows, but where it's easing for other people, it isn't necessarily easing for us. And the reason for that is the fact that my partner, or my wife, she has MS, and she's on immunosuppressant drugs, so drugs which heavily suppress her immune system. And they've just done a recent study on the particular drug that she's on in terms of the vaccine and in terms of COVID, and she's getting about 4% protection from the vaccine. So 4% from 2 doses, where the rest of us are getting, 60, 70, 80, 90% protection. She's getting 4% protection. So you can imagine that that's not great news. I mean, they've only tested it on the antibodies. That's not the whole immune response. There's still T cells, and I think there's another cell as well that triggers an immune response, and they haven't done a study on those particular aspects, but on antibodies alone it's right down at 4%. So we've got to be incredibly careful. I've got to be incredibly careful, whereas I could probably brush it off, and I look at it now and think, well, I've had 2 doses of the vaccine, I'll take my chances. I can't afford to do that for my wife. So unfortunately, I can still get out and I can still do videos and I can still go out and take photos, but it's very much a solo hobby for me at the moment, and try and avoid contact with other people as much as possible. So yeah, I'd love to. Maybe when the virus is a bit more scarce in the community, or maybe if they've found some other therapies that can help my wife, then definitely I would love to get together with a few subscribers, if any will come, to go and have a chat and take some photos. But as things stand at the moment, just playing it really safe and just being really careful. So I've got a question from Mark Taylor, and Mark says, my question for you is, how did you learn your post-processing? Was it from books, online courses, or just watching YouTube tutorials and having to go yourself, or some other way? Well, mainly really from YouTube, I think. So yeah, I've always been very much sort of have a go, have a go at it, teach yourself, try and work out what you're doing, learn yourself. And then if you can't work something out, then go and have a look on YouTube and see if you can work out how to do it, because I think that's often the best way. I think if you sit there and you plow through an online course, a lot of that will go out of your head if you're not using it as you need it. So for instance, if you learn, I don't know, say you learn about luminosity masking, like I did actually buy a course on luminosity masking from somebody, and if you ask me to go back and do that now, not a chance. I'd have to go back and refer to the course. But what I tend to do is, say for instance I've got a cloning issue, I think, I wonder how you do that. I wonder how I could clone that out without, whatever. I'll go and look online, and then I will watch the tutorial, and then I will do what it says, and then I will pick it up from that, because I would have used it in practice, if you like. Whereas I think when you're, it can be really easy just to go, right, I want to learn about X today, and then you learn about. It's kind of, I guess it's kind of like if you learnt Spanish, but never used Spanish, never went to Spain or any Spanish-speaking countries, you pretty soon forget it. But if you went to Spain without learning Spanish and had to use it every day, you pick it up a lot quicker, and it would stick in your head because you're having to use it. So I'm kind of very much like that. I will have a play, see if I can work out how to do something, and then if I can't, then I'll go and look it up on YouTube, but only really when I need it. So I think I kind of guess there's no point learning something if you're never going to use it. So yeah, that's it. Very rarely online lessons. Never. I'm not a big book reader, so I would never really go through books and try and pick things up from that. And yeah, mainly have a go myself, and if I can't work out how to do it, have a look at YouTube, because YouTube's brilliant. So yeah. So Dave Hersos, hi Dave, hope you well, mate. Dave Hersos is, well, he's got two questions here. Number one, money no object. What or where would you love to spend a day shooting, wherever on the planet? So I've had a thought about this, and I've sort of spoken before about places I'd like to go and things I'd like to do. But I think if money were no object, and let's say not just money, but let's say access was no object, and it was just for a day, then I would really, can you hear the birds out there? I would really love to go and either shoot a really big sporting event somewhere. So get right up pitch side at, let's say England gets the Euro finals. I'd love to be pitch side taking photos of that. Or a really big like festival or concert or something, and get right up close to let's say for the sake of whatever, let's say Oasis got back together, and I'd be right up in the front there, right up and underneath them, getting shots on the stage, getting shots. That'd be amazing. So probably not the typical answer, probably not what you'd expect to hear, but yeah, not with any pressure though, not with any expected output. So I wouldn't like to be doing it for a magazine or for a website, or for anything where you have to get the shots. Just somewhere where I could just go and enjoy the experience and just enjoy myself. And the second question he asks is, who inspired you to start photography, and was that pre-YouTube? Well, I've always been interested in photography. I've always been creative and artistic. When I was a kid, I used to love drawing. I was always drawing. I used to have this thing when I was sort of, say, 10 or 11. There used to be, I don't know if you remember these books. There used to be books on, I'm not sure if they were Dorling Kindersley, something like that. And they would be books on aeroplanes, and then sort of big, long, rectangular books like that. And they used to have like the all the info about the aeroplane, and then the technical drawings of them, so the overhead and the side. And I used to love copying those out and trying to draw them myself. And I used to love trying to draw people, and trying to draw scenes and all sorts of things. When I first learned about vanishing points, I used to always draw these imaginary sort of mountains or whatever from that. And then that moved on to photography. So I remember being, must have been very young, 14, something like that, with a old point and click film camera on holiday in Wales, and I'd be looking. It was it's the film cameras. You get the old rolls of film, and I used to always be looking to take an interesting angle of a shot and get down low, or take something a bit different rather than just the usual stuff. And that kind of went on through my whole life, really. I remember going to Greece in sort of 2008 with a iPhone 2, I think it was, or something, 3 megapixel camera or something like that, and just taking shots, you know, trying to take interesting shots of the holiday. I mean, there were snapshots in there as well, but I was always trying to take interesting shots. I was kind of doing, you know, following some of the rules of competition before I knew about the rules of competition. So leading lines and all sorts of things like that, and things on the third. So I was always into that sort of stuff. Always very creative person. And then I guess, you know, who inspired me to really start? There are probably three people, and I would say, I've said this before, but it would have been Thomas Heaton, it would have been Paul Johnson, and it would have been Jason Jones. And those three were on YouTube, and they were the three that were probably the biggest, well, the biggest three in my the biggest three in my vision, if you like. I'm sure there were others around, but those three were the ones that were always popping up in my suggestions when I was watching YouTube. So, and just watching those guys go out and take photos, I remember, I don't think this was Tom, but there was someone, I remember watching a video from someone where they were talking about going off and wrecking a place the evening before, and I think it was abroad. I don't think it was here, but I seem to remember they had a truck, they were in a truck, and it had like an open back, I think, and they went off somewhere up some mountain, and they showed this view, and they said that'll be really good for the sunrise, and they came back down, and they said, right, now I'm gonna sleep in the car or sleep in the van, and I'll get up in the morning really early, and I'll go up and I'll take the shot. And I thought, wow, I didn't realise people went to this length to take photos. I thought you just, you know, went out to a nice place and just snapped something. I didn't think there was all this involved in it. And I guess that's kind of what got me really sort of, ooh, okay. And then watching those guys that I've mentioned on YouTube, and then just thinking I want to emulate those. And at the time, I mean, I think back then there was so few like landscape photography vloggers, if you like, that you thought that it was something really fresh and something really new, and you thought, well, I could do that. And you know, I sort of, oh, I could well, not maybe be as big as those, but you just thought that there were less people doing it than that actually were. And yeah, I just decided that was what I wanted to do. I always loved photography, and it gave me a push. Watching those gave me a push, and then recording it gives you a push to go. Then it's like there's a reason for going, so there's a reason for forcing yourself to get up. Well, I'm not only taking photos, I'm putting a video out to people. So yeah, that was a long-winded answer, wasn't it, to your question? But it was, I've always had the interest pre-YouTube. I've always been creative. I've always wanted to do creative things. But in terms of photography, then probably those three, Thomas Heaton, Paul Johnson, and Jason Jones, gave me that inspiration to go out and start landscape photography properly, and also to start recording my experiences. Need a drink after that. So next up, we've got C. Jones, and their question is, how long does your battery charge last using live view on your Sony? I recently purchased a D850, and as long as I switch off Wi-Fi and Bluetooth, turn on airplane mode, I get about a day's worth when using live view. Well, I haven't done any technical tests on it or anything, but I will say that I've been out, well, I mean, I never really go out all day, but I've been out for large portions of a day, and I think I've never ever had to change the battery on my Sony. So I've got two spare batteries. Like, for instance, when I went to Lincolnshire and then on to Bempton, the live view's always on the camera. I took, I don't know how many shots, over 1,000, I would say, if you count the bird shots. And I come back with a half full battery, so it lasts an awful long time. I will say, if you get the older Sonys, then the battery life on those is absolutely terrible. But the battery life on the Sony A7R III and the bigger batteries seems to be really good, I've got to say. But I haven't done any technical testing on it, so I couldn't tell you for sure. But from experience, pretty good. Okay, so we've got a question now from Robert Jones, and he says, while we all look back at some of our early photos and wonder what the hell we were thinking of, either regarding competition or hideous overprocessing, yeah. Do you ever look back at some and be pleasantly surprised at how good they are? Well, yeah, actually, that question, I read that a few days ago, and it made me go back and look over some of my older stuff. And yeah, definitely. I think that sometimes when you start to sort of specialize a little bit, so kind of YouTube, being on YouTube had originally forced me down the landscape photography route, if you like. And if I look back at some of my landscape photography shots prior, they're awful. They are over processed. They're not particularly well composed, and they're just not great shots. So you can kind of see, if I look back from point A to the current day, I can see a huge progression in terms of how my landscape photography has improved. But then I look back at some of the more abstracty shots that I took, and I actually really like them. And I think that, because they're not, your typical sort of follow the rules shot, the processing on them isn't so important. You can be a bit funky with the processing, and I kind of really like them. And I kind of think that as you go along, especially if you only, if you say, oh, I'm going to be a landscape photography vlogger on YouTube or whatever, you kind of can get really pigeonholed into that, and you can forget about the simple stuff and the shots that you just took because you thought, oh, I quite like the look of that. I mean, I can't remember the last time I went out and just, I don't know, just took a photo of something because it caught my eye, and not because it was anything that was pre-planned or I had it in my sort of mind's eye before I left. And so some of those shots I really sort of look back on and go, oh, yeah, actually that was a really not a bad shot. I mean, I went out and took some shots of some old vintage cars, and although they're really heavily processed, I still like them. I still like the shots and think, oh yeah, actually that's quite nice, even though it's well oversaturated. It kind of suits an oversaturated processing style. So yeah, the answer is, I think, yes, I do. I think there's always something back there. I think that a lot of people would look back on and go, oh yeah. I mean, there's a lot of rubbish as well, but yeah, there are some things that I still look back on now and I'm, oh, actually, yeah, that wasn't a bad shot. Trevor Finnis asks, hi Trevor, hope you're well. I've got a question for your Q&A. If you could go back in time, what famous historical event would you like to have photographed? Well, I think we've covered this before in other Q&As, and I sort of said back then, things like, I think the thing that interests me the most would be the sort of pop culture, fashion, street photography of the sort of late 60s in Britain, and maybe like the Woodstock era in America, photographing those sort of festivals. I'd probably really like to go back now with my camera and do some of the 90s sort of Britpop era and that sort of thing, that sort of cool Britannia style of street photography. I bet that would be really interesting. Go to Manchester or something, sort of early 90s, and capture that scene. But also I was thinking about it, and I wouldn't mind, I kind of wish I was able to, and I hope that some of you guys out there have been able to go out and document the streets during the pandemic. Because that's something we're going to talk about for years and generations to come. This pandemic, and capturing some of those empty streets or people with masks, or all of the things that were so alien to us like 3 years ago or 2.5 years ago that we now just take for, that's just a normal piece of behaviour. Even like capturing someone like, sort of elbow bumping someone else, or just those things that we would look back on in the past and go, what? Is this out of some sort of, science fiction dystopian novel or something? So yeah, I wish I'd have done that, and I hope that some of you guys have managed that. But yeah, in terms of historical events, I just think that, yeah, that sort of late 60s era, or maybe the 90s, Britpop and all that would be, that sort of festivally, sort of fashiony street, sort of cool, sort of, yeah. It would actually be quite interesting to go back to the 60s and photograph the juxtaposition between the older generation and the younger generation. You know, I always find that quite fascinating how that, I mean, if any period was frowned upon, I think at the time by the older generation, it would have been that sort of changed from the sort of very stiff upper lip sort of 50s and early 60s into the much freer and more sort of liberated late 60s. So that, if I could capture maybe sort of older, very smart gentlemen looking upon younger, very sort of differently dressed people with disdain, that would be quite a good picture to get, I think. So I've got a question here now from Roger Rawson, and he says, what software do you use for your YouTube videos, both for stills and for the video? Well, for stills, I use Lightroom and I use Photoshop, predominantly Lightroom. I tend to do all 90% of my processing in Lightroom, and then if there's anything particularly like special, like cloning or making sort of local adjustments, I'll do that in Photoshop. And obviously if I'm taking bird photos or wildlife photos, then I'll also use Topaz Labs denoise to sharpen up the image a bit and just to drop some of the noise out. And for video, strangely, I've always been an Adobe user, so I've always used Premiere Pro, I've always used After Effects, but just lately, the last sort of probably 15 videos, 10 videos, something like that, I've actually moved over to DaVinci Resolve. And the reason is that just lately, I mean, I'm still paying for Adobe for the Premiere Pro package, but it's absolutely buggy as hell. And it's like, I can't, like, I think there was a video a while back, and it took me like nearly a day's worth of work to try and get it rendered. It just would not render. I couldn't get it out. Media encoder stopped working. There's some issue with media encoder in NVIDIA cards, which is just in this day and age, like, really. And in the end, I had to do it via the software encoding, which took like forever, and that crashed several times as well. So, oh, my stomach's rumbling. So yeah, I moved over to DaVinci Resolve, and there's a bit of a learning curve. It's very similar in some respects. Some of it's slightly different, but it just renders like just so much quicker. And I found, like, back in the, you know, when I was using Premiere Pro and I was shooting in 4K, I was having to make proxies for everything, and everything was slow even with the proxies, and the proxies would, you know, sometimes the media encoder would just quit on it making the proxies, and then you'd have to start all over again because it didn't recognize that. Oh, it's an absolute nightmare. So Adobe, sort your stuff out, really. Like, you know, people are paying, especially now you've gone onto this monthly subscription, people are paying all this money, and it's a really, really poor product at the moment, especially if you're a PC user with an NVIDIA card. So yeah, I'll still use After Effects if I need to, you know, but I haven't needed to do anything in After Effects for ages, because I tend to use those for those sort of funky, like, I don't know, colour pops, or putting effects into street videos, but I haven't done those for so long that I haven't used it. But I will use it in the future. But yeah, right now DaVinci Resolve just kills Adobe Premiere Pro, in my opinion. So that's part one of the Q&A wrapped up. Thank you so much for taking the time to ask the questions again, to everyone who's entered one. If it hasn't been answered on this episode, then it will be answered on one of the next couple of episodes. I just want to say a big thank you again. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget that I'll be giving away these two, the book and the screen calibrator. I'll be giving those away at the end of the last episode of the Q&A. Thank you so much again for watching, and I will see you next time.